I like to have a motto, always, at any time. And one motto that I usually use when things come to an end is finish strong. And that's what we're going to do now with this evening Impulse. I'm very much looking forward to be welcoming a person whose company has been mentioned and named throughout the day already quite sometimes. He's a German economist and geologist. He's the founder of SYSTEMIQ and the Landbanking group. And when I asked him, so is there anything that you would like me to say? He was just saying and telling me, well, just tell the audience, I would like to have a nice audience. And I was like, yeah, that's no problem, we can do that. So I kindly ask you to give him the loudest applause that you have for today, okay? 3, 2, 1, Martin Stuchtey, applause. The stage is yours, Martin.
They were nice to me.
They will be.
Tatinia, thanks a lot. Look, it's quite something to walk into here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your interest. I can't help starting by saying that it feels very good and very warm to look through the rows. Quite some fellow travelers here. Proven resilience for the course of the circular economy. So it's very nice to be invited back in. I can't help saying that I really like the whole projection of the circular republic. I think in the end, the way we want to live is not an economic decision, it's a societal decision. It's a matter of the res publica. I quite like that notion. Well, and then finally, I quite like the vibe. I like the fact that this is about getting real. I like the Kultur des Gelingens. I like this, the focus on solutions. Eckhard von Hirschhausen, in fact, he said, look, if we want to be anyhow successful in this space, then we need to have the coolest party in town. And it's very important that we are that. And we also need to have the coolest story in town. And the coolest story, Maria Furtwängler and Lisa, sort of 2 weeks ago, just issued a report. People want to know about climate. They want to know about biodiversity, but they found out in a media study, 2 things need to be given. The first one is you need to provide the context, as you did this afternoon when you talked about the GAP report, and you need to offer solutions, otherwise we're helpless. And you did that, you just talked about the batteries. Now, all of that I feel in this room. I feel the good energy, and so probably this is where I should stop. Unless I take it one step further and take ourselves to a slightly more uncomfortable conversation. The problem is with all the good energy that we have, we are a bunch of losers. And we are, at least now, that's not fair. We would be a bunch of losers if we continue to play the way we've done it so far. 2015, we said that we want to have a circular economy action plan. And we said by 2030, we want to see the first results. We are 2/3 into that match, and we haven't seen the results yet. There's a genre, I love that, movies, where they have locker room speeches. You know, Sommermärchen, you know, Invictus, you know, Coach Carter. So everyone is down, and then there is a locker room speech. And I think we owe each other a locker room speech. Let's have a locker room speech tonight. We are 2/3 into the game. And here we are, globally, we hear it, the global circularity gap is growing. Resource productivity is stagnating at best. Look at Europe, there has just been this summer, there has been the Council of Auditors, they actually said, even against the very low bar of what we thought we were doing in 2015, which is to double recycling rates, A, recycling, B, double on that very low level, we are far away from that. Look at business. Shane, Some of you might know the brand. It's a hyper-fast fashion, it's a hyper-linear, it's a hyper-low cost, it's a hyper-brown brand. They and a few other Chinese brands actually have taken 50% of the market share in fast fashion in 2 years in Spain. Take the complete or near-complete breakdown of the recycling markets during the pandemic. Take oil and gas. I mean, how we have been giving speeches of how they go from combustion to materials, how they go from linear to circular. 2 weeks ago, there was a speech from the CEO of Chevron. Essentially, he said straight in our face, guys, face it, face reality. In 50 years, we'll still be burning oil. So here we go. 2/3 into the game. And in the locker room, there's one locker room speech which I like a lot from a guy called Herb Brooks. 1980, that was when the US played the Soviet Union ice hockey team again. Some people say that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. And they have lost every single game until then. They were down. And then he goes into the locker room and he says, he does the typical thing you do in a locker room speech. First, the odds. He said, look, we've always been losing. Then the opening. He says, look, this time it's different. And then there's the path where he describes sort of why this time they can win. Because they don't know what you know, that we are in the winning mode tonight. And so perhaps let's walk a little bit through that. In the end, I don't know where we are ending, hopefully over a beer, Matze. It could be that we are utterly deflated and demotivated because we find out that circular economy is this impossible agenda. We are up against dynamics. We are up against a context that is increasingly weaponizing climate and environmentalism overall. I mean, we are in a different place now than where we've been some years ago. So perhaps it's this very complex multi-tier reconfiguration theme where there's no political space. We don't have the incentives in order to do that. Perhaps we come out and we say we are reignited because the sun is always biggest just before it sets, and it could be that we are seeing the linear sunset, and there are strong secular forces in our back, or it could be that we come out, no, we need to refocus, we need to tell our story differently, and we need to offer also stronger incentives and be smarter about it. Any one of those, I think I definitely will end up saying it all depends on us. Now, where do we start? There's many ways to say, where are we on the circular journey? Let me try this. I did it last week, and people patiently set it out. Let me add a slight autobiographic pinch to it. I'm a geologist, Tutina, you said it kindly, and an economist. The economy is getting faster every day, nano trading. And then there's geology. It's, if you think about it, it's this very slow business, super slow. Nothing happens. Millions of years, nothing. And then when something happens, something bigger, we call it a state shift. And so every 5 to 10 million years, you have a state shift. Now, I didn't expect that during my lifetime I would witness a state shift. Climate, we are now witnessing a 5 million years anomaly. And here we go. I was born with 320 ppm. Now we jointly live in a 424 ppm world. Our oldest child was born at 365, and our youngest child was born at 375. I have had 100,000, so climatologically, I'm 100,000 years old, perhaps even 1 million, we don't know. Now, we know it that we now live in a 1.5 degrees world, and recently we went sailing with Johan Rockström, and in the evenings we were giving us presentations on where we are. And essentially there's a very interesting moment. It's almost the Oppenheimer moment of climatology. Scientifically we know that we will run into a 1.5 degrees overshoot scenario. At the same time, if we say that, which would be scientifically right, we are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy because we don't have anyone to keep ourselves in that corridor. It's an Oppenheimer moment, if you think about it. Not an Oppenheimer moment, Søren. So that's climate, and then biodiversity. It's a 50 million year anomaly. As a geologist, we do fossils, and you learn that the typical duration of a species is 1 million years. We have 1 million species, so typically you have one extinction per million species years. It's one of those new KPIs that we need to learn now. And currently we are running at about 1,000 to 10,000, that background rate. We have lost 80 mammal species out of 5,040 since over the last 500 years. Now, what do you do with that? The only thing that you can do with our Kahneman's brains is, because it's so tall order, is that you trivialize it, you politicize it, or you ignore it. And I've chosen ignoring it. And that worked very effectively. I joined McKinsey for 20 years. The first 10 years were wonderful. But then there was a moment, 2006, that was Katrina, that was the Stern Report, that was Inconvenient Truth, where it was clear you can't be a professional without being able to provide a professional answer to the one question that really matters. So then we went into the other stuff, energy transition, RED+, water, the early version of circular economy. We called it the zero waste economy back then, Susanna. Now, and all of that was wonderful, but then there's a moment when you ask yourself, actually, does the sum of all local optima, every company trying to do the right thing, actually add up to systemic change? There was one chart which killed my career, at least. Some of you know it. I call it the Great Divergence, how you can show that all the way towards the mid-80s, all the macro indicators of the economy actually were growing in sync. So there was the labor productivity, growth, employment, median family income, and any reasonable measure of societal progress, such as the inclusive wealth indicator, genuine progress indicator, and that since the mid-80s, they are diverging. So it's labor productivity storming ahead, but being trailed by growth, being trailed by employment, being trailed by median family income, and being trailed by inclusive wealth indicator, which is a completely new paradigm altogether. We are growing poor. This is different. This is new. Now, and at that very moment, you find out that it's not about optimizing single companies and single products, that we are really up against something that's far bigger, that's far more systemic. Well, and as the story goes, then together with Søren, we started the attempt actually to wrestle with these big system transitions: energy transition, industrial resource transition, global land use transition. And if you look at it from a systems point of view, you can draw a picture that is in fact much more optimistic and positive. Here's the energy transition. We call it the Paris effect. In 2015, when we started, 25% of the solutions that we need for a successful energy transition were pre-market. Then in Glasgow, it was 75, and 25% already mass market. And we think in 2030, we will have about 75% of all the solutions for the energy transition ready for the mass market. We are far behind, I know, but it's a dreamable dream. We can imagine how that target system would look like. Well, then there is the global land use and food transition, which is even slower. But here again, we have a couple of forces in our back. There is, for the first time, we have a political will. We have a 30 by 30, a global biodiversity framework. We have some real demand coming from companies that is actually saying, we get it. Nature is critical infrastructure that we need to be invested into. It's not this thing outside the economy. And then finally, we have technology, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Now, and then there is the circular economy. There's the industrial resource transition, where we are really struggling. But again, we are finding here is there's also there's something interesting to be said about it. The first time actually there was a secret conversation in a in a back room in Brussels was 2012, where we were trying to convince each other that this could in fact be an interesting economic outlook for Europe, not as an ecological but as an economic agenda. Then 2030 for the first time, and you will hear it straight from the horses or from Jannis' mouth tomorrow, when there was an environmental commissioner who actually was prepared to take a stance and go for it. And then 2015, there was a circular economy action plan, the first time that a whole continent decided for itself that resource productivity is at the heart of our future wealth generating engine, something completely new. And then there was Juncker coming in who said, look, we can't afford it, but at the same time, there has already been so much momentum and backup that 150 CEOs and 15 ministers on the environment were writing to Juncker and said, now we need this. This is not a cost to our economy. This is what we actually, this is part of a new European way of running our economies. And then there was in 2019, there was the European Green Deal, with the circular economy right at its heart as the capstone of the European way of running our economy. Now, and if you look around the world, I think the idea has taken off. China calls it the ecological civilization. Japan calls it resource efficiency. Canada calls it smart prosperity. And we call it the circular economy. In the end, it's to the same avail. But at the same time, and that's how I started, we don't see the progress that we need. The very first article we ever wrote was named Towards a Circular Economy, the business and economic rationale for an accelerated transition. So that it still breathes the optimism, how we can how this actually can be a carrying force, how it will be providing benefits, how people will be wanting it. Now, the last one that I wrote was called I'm not sure whether Tillman is here, was called The Impossibilities About the Circular Economy, where we are wrestling with the fact that this is a very difficult political program at least. Now, but looking at it from the semi-distance, I think this time round, and we are getting to the openings of the locker room speech, I think this time around there are some openings, 5 of them, that actually could change the path if we embrace them with both hands. One is about net zero resources. One is around the industrial metaverse. One is around first best regulation. One is around nature capital. And one is around industrial symbiosis 2.0. Let me quickly run through that. The first one is, and I think, Thomas, you said it a moment ago, we live in a different world now. When I was a consultant, we told everyone that we live in a demand-side economy. So there's always infinitely elastic supply. There's always a Chinese who will give you the supply that you need. It's all about stimulating demand. Now we live in a supply-induced inflation. We live under supply chain disruption. We live in a geopolitical resource competition, particularly for the net zero stuff, the recyclates, the green methanol, the clean ammonia, the green power and the green hydrogen, of course, but also sustainable biomass and so on, and functional metals. And now we live in a world where climate change is real. This year we didn't get oranges from the Mediterranean. There are 2 breweries in Germany which went bust because for the lack of hop, you don't get hop. So everything is now geared towards the supply side. And that of course creates a completely new benefit and meaning and relevance for the circular economy agenda that we can exploit for ourselves and use it, because this is actually now that for the first time we have seen how geopolitical dependency feel on our skin. For the first time, we have something to offer here which goes beyond just the next mineral deal with Mongolia. Now that's number one, and I think that's an opening that we can that will give us for decades to come a very, very strong rationale for what we're doing here. The second one is about first best regulation. So as we entered, as we had the conversations in Brussels the first time, no one really knew how to regulate yourself into a circular economy. In the meantime, we have learned a lot. Susanne, there is sort of the Circular Economy Initiative Germany, where we, I think, identified 10 things that you do. And here is a good practice, how to create market rules that actually make you want a more circular industrial design. At the same time, we've also learned that this complex agenda with sort of ordnungspolitischen Anreizen, with informational elements, with infrastructural elements, so a circular economy agency, with fiscal elements, sort of a reduced VAT for some secondary materials, for example, that all of that is difficult and it might not happen, perhaps it will not happen. I think there's 2 things that we can say now that are actually first best regulation that could come to our help and that will come to our help. The first one is a resource tax, not for resources but for carbon. We won't have resource taxes, not in a world of a cost of living crisis and not in a world of supply side inflation. But the carbon tax will come, and that will actually provide right incentives also for resource use, not everywhere but 75%. And the other one is an interesting one, and we are right at the cusps of it, where we see a positive pairing and a self-reinforcement between supply chain disclosure, the alphabet soup, CSRD, on the one hand, and on the other hand, extended producer responsibility, which will go further and further, the more CSRD, the more extended responsibility. And the big dream in the end is the first best regulation is really producer ownership, and some of you, Bertram, we have been working on this. Could there be a world where you're not allowed to sell stuff anymore? Would it make us poor? And I think the preliminary economic judgment is no, it wouldn't. That's the first best regulation, and we are, I think, cycling towards more of that responsibility. The third one is the metaverse. We are increasingly able, and the makerspace is of course the home for that thinking, we are able to represent, to visualize, and then also to steer our physical world and to create a parallel universe to the physical one, which is the digital one. And that will change and provide incentives for a massive acceleration of us being circular. And I don't talk about that will only come much later and that will be bereaved with a couple of rebound effect. There's a social metaverse. I'm talking about the industrial metaverse, and there's no place better placed actually to play a role in that than Munich. Now, the fourth one is nature capital, and some of you know that this sort of has taken an increasing space in my thinking, and that's in also the end of my autobiographic journey. We think that nature is critical infrastructure that deserves to be investable. And in order to do that, we need to bring nature onto the balance sheet. Nature needs to be part of what we consider wealth. Nature is prosperity 2.0. In order to do that, however, we need to be able to make it investable, fiduciary grade investable. So we have created a technology company in Munich now, which has the ability to give every pixel of the planet an ecological passport, a biophysical nature capital account with regard to biodiversity, carbon, water, and soil. And if you have that nature capital account for every polygon of the planet, then you have an underlying for the issuance of performance of nature service agreement. And these actually can create a new currency for performance agreements, for nature-backed performance agreements, nature-backed assets, nature-backed securities, and in the future, nature-backed currencies, and one day nature-backed wealth. So it creates a way actually to consider nature investable. That, of course, creates direct and indirect incentives to be using our material world completely differently, because for the first time, nature is fully priced in. Now, and the final thing is industrial symbiosis, and behind that I mean you. I mean the Circular Republic. I think if there's anything that we've seen now in an age where we witness the breakdown of governance and multilateralism, we see that the real backbone of our societies are local communities. In fact, the circular economy started with industrial symbiosis. We never got our hand around it, but now I think it's almost the backbone of this movement. This is where innovation takes place. This is where we are starting to connect material streams and value chains, and this is exactly where we are creating small trust economies in the way you are doing it in Munich right now, and I think that's very meaningful. And that also leads me to perhaps the very final point, and back to the locker room speech. With all of that, of course, it's unclear where this is going, and it's utterly dependent on the stance that we are taking. And I think that's important. Some of you know Viktor Frankl is my Haus- und Hof philosopher. And the one thing that he says is, look, the only freedom that no one can take from us, it's the freedom to choose the stance in front of a problem, the stance in front of a circumstance. And I think this is also what we have to remind ourselves of, to choose the right stance and consider this as a worthwhile agenda. And to do it like Herb Brooks says, look, there's a reason why you are here. This is your night, this is your time. So that's the locker room speech on the circular economy. Thanks a lot for inviting me.